Hello, friends. We're starting a spring fundraiser and we're looking specifically for monthly supporters. Every day, people ask me, how's the ministry going? And honestly, that's a really hard question to answer because there's two answers to it. On the one hand, it's going fantastic. Every day, Peter and I get to come into this office and help people through spiritual direction, through this podcast, through our weekly emails, personal phone calls. Every day, we're seeing more and more people find out about us. And we're actually able to individually and in group ways help people strengthen their relationship with Jesus. And we get to walk with them compassionately. It's awesome. On the other hand, we've had to reduce our salaries this year to balance our budget. Now, the good news is we have balanced our budget. But in order for the Booth family and the Gamble family to continue doing this work uninterruptedly, we need your help. We intentionally chose to be a ministry, to be supported by people like you, so that we could offer what we do either free or extremely affordably. We want to help people. We're so grateful for those of you who have supported us for so long. If you haven't yet, please join us and become a monthly supporter. Our goal is to raise an additional $2,000 a month. So please join us. Go to signpostin.org/donate and become a monthly supporter today. Again, signpostin.org/donate. And thank you so much. Welcome back to the back porch, everybody. It's good to have you with us. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Peter. Hi, Peter. Good to see you.
Hey, good to be here with you, Brandon.
Matt is not going to be with us today. We're actually recording a couple episodes sort of to put into the bank, so to speak, as Peter will be stepping out for a couple of weeks coming up here in not too long, actually, Peter, right? I don't know if I'm allowed to tell people why yet.
Yeah, well, my wife and I are expecting our first child at the end of May, and so really grateful I'll be able to take, a couple weeks a month off and kind of just be with my wife and our son. And so we're trying to put some legwork in to make sure that you guys have fantastic podcasts to listen to, even when I don't have time to edit them. So,
Yep. So we want to make sure that Peter and Rachel have plenty of time. So we're going to give them a good long while, which means we're just kind of setting it all up. So anyway, if you want to send your congratulations, then please do. You can actually send them to Peter directly at his email, petergamble@signpostin.org, or you can send them to podcast@signpostin.org, and we'll make sure he gets them. And Rachel as well. But yeah, we're excited about it. Congratulations, Peter. This is going to be super fun.
Yeah, it's really exciting and intense.
Yeah,
it's a lot to consider, but we're super excited. So,
yeah, it is. We are all super excited around here. So, listeners, we want to jump in, but I have to tell you again about if you have not signed up yet for our email that comes out weekly, please. This would be a great time to do it. You get to have announcements about the Gamble family probably as things are happening, but also you get weekly encouragement. Our email has really been well received and we're doing some really cool things with it. We give you thoughtful content every week to help you not worry about anything. But instead, we want to encourage you to rejoice in the Lord by calling attention to the presence of Jesus. And you're going to get a lot of different content, but all of it is aimed at helping you do kind of what Philippians 4 talks about, which is thinking about those things which are true, pure, beautiful, etc. To dwell on those things, which is a way of dwelling on the presence of God. And then we want to encourage your prayers so that the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ. So that's like the mission of our email, and we've been doing really good work there. Peter has written some articles recently that I've really enjoyed. At the time of this recording, actually, some of our Easter articles are coming out, which you will have missed if you have not signed up for our email. But don't miss future stuff. It's really good stuff. So go to signpostin.org. There's a link at the top that says, I think, free ebook. Click that, sign up. You get a free ebook called 5 Prayers That Can Obliterate, 5 Prayers That Can Obliterate Anxiety. Um, Pretty good book too, if I may say so myself. It tells you a little bit of my story of dealing with anxiety, as well as offers 5 prayers that I have found incredibly powerful in battling my own anxiety. Really, these prayers have changed my life. So, free ebook, free email with fantastic content, what's not to love? So go to the website, sign up for that. All right. Peter, I think that's all the big announcements we have to make. Today, we want to tackle literally, I think, one of the big things that I know I have been struggling with. Speaking of anxiety, I know you and I have talked about this a ton
Hmm.
here at the office. I have friends who are struggling with this. It's not surprising, given that this is an election year, that everybody's feeling like God is asleep in the boat, that the storm is huge, that the waves are crashing, that the country is in jeopardy. And I'll tell you, nobody, nobody I don't know anybody who's happy about what's going on in our country this year. And listeners, this is not a political episode. We're not going to talk about politics other than to say, I feel it. I am sick and tired already of all the presidential stuff and all the campaigning and all the dirt slinging. And frankly, I don't even look at the news that much. And I'm sick and tired of it. So I don't know, Peter, are you feeling the same? I mean, I know you are, but what's where are you at?
Yeah, certainly it is stressful. Um, I also tend to go on a diet of not much news for my own sanity, um, because it's just stressful. It doesn't seem like there's any good news ever, and I don't know. Like sometimes I'm just like, well, I feel like the news has never been good, and I haven't missed out that much yet. So I don't know. I definitely around this election year though, it's sort of I remember 4 years back, 8 years back, and stuff. I remember where I was when the election news breaking and the responses of people. One year I was at a very conservative Christian university, and just even the response there and the fear and strife, and then it's volatility just puts me on edge, like
Yeah.
something big is about to like break.
Yeah.
And it just is unsettling for me.
Well, and it's, yeah, every presidential election you hear the same thing and it just gets it's like it's it's like it's our circus or something, but you hear the same thing over and over and over again, which is this is the end of the world. We're all going to die. If if that guy gets elected, then you're going to lose all your freedoms and everybody's going to die and there's going to be civil war. And the sad thing is, like I used to kind of chuckle and be like, yeah, they say that every year. But I'll tell you, the last couple cycles, it's almost like I start feeling like, no, maybe it's actually true. Maybe we are gonna anyway. And then that's not even to talk about world news. I mean, world news is terrifying. So, I did a little background. I was like, I wonder what the sentiment is. So I looked at the Pew Research Center, and this is from 2023. So this is about 6 months old by the time people hear this, maybe a little bit more. Um, so you can imagine it's worse now than what these stats are. Uh, so obviously Americans have been critical of politics for a long time, but we are at an all-time low in terms of trust and in terms of confidence in our political system and in our politicians. So 63% of Americans express not too much or no confidence at all in the future of the US political system. Dude, that's terrifying. Just 4%, 4% of adults say that the political system is working very well. I mean, honestly, it didn't even surprise me when I read that. I was like, "Yep, that sounds about right." Um,
Mhm.
Only 16% of the public say they trust the federal government, which I think is a high number. I think that's high. I don't know, because I don't know, have any friends that fall into that category. And then, okay, I gotta show you this. If you're on Zoom, or excuse me, if you're on YouTube, if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll be able to see this. And if you don't, that's fine. Maybe we can figure out a way to put it into the show notes or something. But here is here's what Pew found out about how Americans feel when they think about politics. And this is like, to me, this was like reading my own personal profile, right? 65% feel exhausted when they think about politics. I I I am
Mm,
laughing not because that's funny. I'm laughing because it's so relatable. That is the primary feeling I have. 55% feel angry always or most of the time. Oh my gosh, more than half of us are angry and exhausted
mm.
whenever we think about politics. And then look at the next one down. Okay, 10% feel hopeful. 4% feel excited. The vast majority never feel hope or excited about politics. Oh my gosh. I mean, like, I think these numbers have always been weighted this way, but I don't know. Which one is it? Do you feel exhausted or angry? Peter, which of
Oh
those
man,
categories is
both. I don't know. Um, it's. I feel like the anger comes from believing that something is kind of possible, yet certain people are screwing it up, right? Like exhausted is like this never. There, I'm not expecting this to work. I'm just so done with it. This is the way human beings are. But I imagine the angry response, which I can relate to, is like, well, if they just did the right things, if they just weren't X, Y, and
Yeah,
Z, a bonehead, a idiot,
yeah.
we could be there. And I'm so angry that it's possible, and yet people are ruining the country. Um, and I don't know, if in my brain, I can sort of connect that sentiment to kind of where we're going with how one might feel towards God. In the midst of
Yeah.
all this chaos, it's like, all right, God, I know that you could, I know that you can, I know that you're working, but then why all this? And,
Mhm.
and man, I can almost I think for me and maybe for other Christians, like, non-believers might not give a rip that God isn't doing anything. They might be exhausted by that idea that, wow, whatever,
Mhm.
that's ridiculous, mumbo jumbo, religious hopefulness. But we as Christians who have the expectation that God is alive and well, it's like you look at the world and like I can resonate with a little bit of like, "Well, where are you, God?" Like, it's
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
there's a touch of bitterness of I feel betrayed, and I think some of those emotions, I don't know, come through in the story that we wanted to
Yeah.
bring up with today's podcast.
Yeah. I mean, that's why the title is God Asleep in the Boat, because it's obviously a reference to Jesus calming the storm. I do think it's just before we go there, as you were talking, I sort of allowed myself to slow down and feel my exhaustion over politics. And frankly, it's over the whole, it's not just politics, but I think that's just exacerbated this year. But one of the things that I realized I and many of my friends are exhausted about is it's a constant it's a you can't escape the feelings of panic. You can't escape the feelings of fear because one, that's the way that they're grabbing our attention in the news headlines. Every headline has to cause outrage, cause panic, cause fear, or we don't pay attention. It gets just lost in the sea of stuff. And the other reason I realized was, frankly, I'm tired of it with I'm tired of talking about it with my friends because it feels constantly um, threatening. I,
Mm,
if I don't know my friend very well, is it Are they going to be angry? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to lose a friend over a freaking election? I mean, it was bad the last time this happened 4 years ago. My friends were, people were like posting on Facebook, if you vote for fill in the blank, I will unfriend you.
Yeah.
And I know people who did that in real life. Like they weren't just doing it on Facebook. They're like, you voted for so and so, I'm done with you forever. And it's like, I'm exhausted. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. I'm just done with that. So,
Yeah, certainly that sense of like that the threat of losing relationships or just
or them
other
just being difficult.
right. That is such a draining way of life, like, so that makes so much sense. Like nobody can live in fight or flight mode forever, right? That's
Right.
a specific response we have to like a threat that gets us away or, solves a problem. But it feels like during these election cycles in particular, and just kind of in general in the crazy, chaotic world where stuff always feels like it's going wrong, it's almost like we are always in fight or flight. And that's so,
Mhm.
like, our bodies literally can't do that. Like, we are
Right.
actually exhausted.
Mhm. And
Mm,
there's no I think most of us I mean, I can only speak for myself, but prior to starting this work, I had no context. I had no relationships where I could escape that. And I think it's true even now in the sense that every relationship I have. So let me explain. Like my work was highly politically charged. My church felt like a place largely, and I think this is true for most churches, where you have to just be careful, right? You can't talk about politics. You can't talk about, religion. And weirdly in church, usually you have to be careful because you don't know, you don't want to cause a problem and division on a Sunday morning. My friends group was basically either my church or my work, and so I had to be careful with them. And I had nothing. I had no context in which I could like complain or talk or say what I really thought without worry about losing something. And it wasn't until I got into a like started doing this work, I'm like, let's intentionally create spaces where that's okay.
mhm.
And that's hard. You can't just do that. Like you have to have sometimes some boundaries set up. Like with my spiritual directors, one place I do it, with some of my spiritual directing friends and some of the new friends I've made in this ministry that are outside of it. I think kind of what we try to do on Wednesday nights, like you have to have somebody guarding the boundaries that says it's okay to have any opinion that you have and you're not going to get attacked. And uh,
Mm.
we're not going to kick you out either socially or literally. Anyway, I'm that's just where my mind went. I was just realizing prior to try to consciously thinking about creating these groups, I didn't really have it anywhere. So
Yeah. Mm.
I don't know. Maybe that's partly generational. I don't. Did you feel like you had spaces where you could kind of unfilteredly talk about what you were thinking?
Um, I don't know if there were definitely conversations I was having with the people I was close to in my life, but in a weird way, those are like those relationships have the most filters because you're not just a uninterested listener. You're my dad. You're my brother. Like, right. So they were
Mhm.
good. I think they were good and healthy. I remember one particular time sitting, uh, all of us were over at my parents and we were sitting around in the basement and like talking and it was good, but man, it was hard. It wasn't like a peace filled conversation. There was some stress and threat, but I, like ultimately, I know it was good, and I think a healthy conversation can happen even when you don't feel at peace.
Mhm.
But I certainly have come to really appreciate spaces like we create here at Signpost Inn. That it's like, all right, let's set out with the goal in mind to have this space and to make that clear. And so that has been kind of unique for me these past
Mhm.
couple of years.
Yeah. And it's impossible to do perfectly, I know, but it's worth striving for in my in my opinion. Like, it's been really healing in my life.
Mm,
Which I don't know if that actually connects us to where we wanna kinda talk about with this passage. The listeners, the outline of the show, if you will, is, can you relate with everything we just said? And we're assuming you can. Alright, well then, essentially, can you relate with the feeling that God is asleep in this boat that's being tossed by the storm? Whatever that boat is, whether it's the country, your family, um, just your
mm,
life, uh, you know, the struggles that you're going through that make you feel exhausted, angry, panicked, and will hopefully give some hope is where we want to go next. Give some practical answers. And we're actually two-parter here. We've got a second episode planned after this where we talk about some really practical stuff. This one is to set the stage. Is God actually asleep in the boat? What do we do with that? And I think that's why the passage is so prevalent. Let me actually again, if you're on YouTube, we're gonna show you a painting, a Rembrandt painting of the passage in Mark where the boat is being battered by the sea and Jesus is sleeping and then they wake him up. We'll read the passage as well, but I keep losing my share screen button. There it is. So this is Rembrandt's painting of the passage. And Peter, do you have the passage in front of you? Do you mind just reading it and we can let people look at this passage while you read it?
yep. So here, this is Mark 4:35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, he told them, "Let's cross over to the other side of the sea." So they left the crowd and took him along since he was in the boat, and other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking over the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. He was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. So they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Silence, be still." The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Then he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And they were terrified and asked one another, "Who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him."
So if you're on YouTube and looking at the painting, or if we'll put a link to it, it sort of captures the exact moment that they wake Jesus up. And one of the things I especially love about this painting is how just active it is. Like, you don't even notice Jesus at first, which I think is fascinating. Um, your eye is actually drawn to where all the light is and the waves and the disciples fighting them, and then it moves. You move back to where Jesus is and where he's waking up, and the disciples are complaining. Um, so and this is not a show about art, but in a beautiful artistic way, you capture the whole movement of the story in a in a snapshot, right? The whole is represented in one. I don't know. If I were to place myself, and Peter, maybe this is something to think about. If I were to place myself in this story right now, I honestly feel like I'm up near the front in this painting, or at the beginning of the passage that you just read, where it's the storm is crashing and I am quite convinced I'm not gonna make it. My family's not gonna make it.
Mm,
And I'll let you can respond how you feel about the story, but I've thought about this one a lot. I know that Jesus is in the boat. Like I don't think God is absent from this world.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, right now in my life, and I am frustrated at him that that he seems figuratively to be asleep. Like he's not doing some things that I really want him to do. And for me, it's not so much about politics, it's about personal stuff. But I think what makes me even more frustrated, and I think this is why this story connects so well, it's almost worse that he's present and quote unquote asleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because and I
Mm.
think this is partly what the disciples are saying. It's like he doesn't get it. Like how could you be asleep at a time like this when I most need you,
Mhm.
when the world most needs
Mhm.
you? You should I don't disbelieve in your existence, but I sure as heck don't understand your inaction.
That's the exact oh, that's so relatable. This is the exact thing that I was feeling when it was like the difference between exhausted and like angry about the state of the world. Like I wrote down, for Christians, the anger, like it's not that we believe that God is absent, right? Or else you're right. If you don't believe in God, then you're not Christian. But for people of faith, it's like, no, I so trust that you are real, that you are here. But
Mhm,
then like you're saying, that makes the feeling that you're not doing anything, like, it intensifies it because I know you're here, God, yet you seem to not care about me. Like,
mhm,
you have to know what's going on, and yet you're doing nothing? Like you said, that almost feels worse than if you weren't here. It'd be like, "Oh, I wish Jesus were here because if he were here, he would do something," right? But it's like, "No, I know he's here, so why isn't he doing something?"
yes. Yes. I mean, it's the classic question, right? Why doesn't God do stuff about evil? Like, why does he allow bad things to happen? And I think the disciples capture our feelings, the feelings of a believer, if you will, but the feelings nonetheless. Wouldn't they say in this particular rendition, in Mark, "Teacher, don't you care that we are going to die?"
Mhm.
Like, that's what they say. "Don't you care that we're all gonna die?" And it reminds me again of one of those distinctions that I run into in my own life all the time, and I run into with people I work with all the time, which is I know what the answer to that question is, right? Like if you
Sure.
give me that answer, or excuse me, if you give me the question, does Jesus care about whether you're going to die or not, on an essay or on an essay test, I will write the best essay you've ever seen explaining why I know that Jesus cares about our death. And all that
Mm.
will make me that will do for me is make me angry because I know the right answer, but I also know what it feels like. It does not feel like he cares sometimes. Maybe more often than not. I don't know.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I think that's one of the things we strive to do with all the content we produce is almost like identify the experience that we're going through that we imagine other people are really struggling with too. And I feel like there's probably a moment here just to pause with that and say, I think that's okay to feel that way. Right.
Yeah.
Like I don't think like I'm not sitting here being like, oh gosh, is Brand like what's wrong with Brandon?
Mhm.
Like one, it's relatable and like there's like compassion on that. Like, oh yeah, I get that. And in the safety, like we want to say there's like a safety to feel that way. And to acknowledge that God isn't nobody's kicking us out and going, "What? You feel that
Yeah.
way about God? You're like you're
Yeah.
not a real Christian." We like, and so I don't know. It's just if you can relate at all to that, listeners, just know that that's not. This isn't like a disqualification or something. It's just, man, we get it, and I think that God gets it too, and He's not angry with us.
Yeah. I so often hear this and there's a certain truth to it, but there's this refrain about the disciples being stupid, right? They don't get it. And there's a there's a there's a theological truth to that. Like, the narrative of the gospels through Acts is that they couldn't understand what was happening until the Holy Spirit comes, and then their eyes are opened, and that's what the Holy Spirit does. Amen. But there I here I and frequently when I hear that, like, the disciples are stupid, they didn't get it, they're dumb, they don't understand. My response is something kind of the opposite. It's like, it's not that they're dumb. They're actually really smart. They're seeing things for the way they really are. Without all the information, for sure. They don't have all the information. But this is the actual right response to the boat being about to be capsized in the middle of the
Mm,
sea under a massive storm, right? Like, if it's true that our country is going to hell in a handbasket, the right response is fear, anger, do something.
mm,
And I think, that's one thing I like, just kind of following on what you're saying. I don't think this is a dumb response at all. I don't even think it's a dumb response to be angry at God, so to speak. In fact, I think, and maybe this is where we can sort of make a little turn, but it's at least possible to read that line, right? Jesus is sleeping in the stern of the boat on a cushion, and they wake him up and they say, "Teacher, don't you care that we are going to die?" As an echo of the prayers of God's people throughout all time, right? This isn't them. I mean, they're going to the right place.
mm,
They're taking their petitions to God.
right,
And they may be angry and they may be scared, but they are going to the right
right.
place.
Yeah.
And they may be even, as Jesus is going to say, they may have a small faith, and quote unquote, the better way to do it would have been to trust without question and just sail on, knowing that if God is asleep in the boat, nothing's going to happen. Because there's the other twist, right? I mean, one of the things they're not noticing is Jesus isn't worried.
Mm,
But so that may have been the better response, and we can talk about that in a minute.
mm,
But yet I still want to just kind of resonate with all of us who are exhausted and angry and going, God, what the hell?
yeah.
Like, at least you're saying it to God.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
least you're going to the right place, making your requests and complaints known.
It reminds me of our recent conversation on the Psalms and kind of diving into the Psalms. And there's some amazing expressions in there that you go, yeesh, they said that to God? Like, and like
Yeah.
they're pretty direct. But the encouragement is that that's an acceptable, like God said, yeah,
Mhm,
you, like you're saying, pour it out to me, pour out your anger,
mhm,
your frustration, your sorrow. I can handle that. Like, I'm not going to be like, how dare you talk to me like that? So I think that's
yep,
one I think that's a shift. When you're
mhm,
talking about our image of God, is our image of God that he's asleep? Is our image of God that he's petty? That if we get angry at him,
mm,
he's gonna go, well, now you've got another thing coming. I think that's an important step to navigating crisis moments, chaotic seasons, is to know that we can
mhm,
react and react towards God and vent
mhm,
and whatever. And he's not going to be like, oh, well, I'm through with you. Geez Louise, can't believe you'd respond like that.
mhm,
He has compassion. He
mhm,
understands.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, that is such a shift, right? There's a I and I share it. There seems to be a automatic belief that if I am not perfectly calm and trusting and have no fear and have no anger, that God's mad at me. And actually, what this story shows us, because the next thing that happens is that Jesus gets up rebukes the sea, which beautiful, beautiful language there. Um, I've commented on this before, but I love this the point that the first thing Jesus does here is not rebukes the disciples. He rebukes the sea and the wind and he says, "Silence, be still." Which there's the image of a God who there's Jesus saying, "I know why you're angry. I know why you're scared. I'm not mad at you for being scared or angry. In fact, my rebuke is for the thing that is scaring you and making you angry. My rebuke is against the craziness out there." And you have Jesus protecting his children, his friends, the ones he loves. He immediately gets up and says, "Stop scaring my sheep."
Hmm.
It's an immediate come to their aid and protection, which shatters that image of God that we were just talking about, where it's like God's going to be mad at us for being scared. God's disappointed in us for being angry at him even. Like, no, he immediately stands up and says, "Stop scaring my sheep," because our fear, our stuff elicits compassion and love. And he does then turn, he says, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And again, I think we hear that as rebuke of the disciples, and I'm not so sure that it is.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think there's a I think there's a humanity of Jesus here, a little bit of a, "Oh, I've done so much." But I think there's also a real invitation. It's less a rebuke and more of a, "Hey, why are you afraid?" Like, it's that way that a dad would take his children who have not trusted him, and he wouldn't be angry, but he'd be like, "Hey, what were you scared of? I was there, right? Did you notice that? Okay, so there was no need to be scared." And it's sort of this like, "Let me show you what was really going on that you might reflect on it and have more faith." Rather than a like, "Ah, you should have known better, idiot." I don't think it's that
Yeah.
at all.
Well, it occurred to me because I often hear it that way, even just reading through it. It's like almost a humiliating thing. Like, have you no faith? And I imagine me hanging my head low in response to that, being like, "Oh my gosh!" But I noticed the disciples' response.
Mhm,
They they marveled, right?
mhm.
They said, "Oh my goodness." That like their faith, their trust went up. Like
Right,
Jesus was building their faith. He wasn't tearing them down and saying, "I can't believe you have no faith." Obviously, we can't step back and hear exactly how he said that, but whatever the tone was, he used that to build their faith. It wasn't a angry
right,
tearing down and frustrated, "Oh my goodness."
right.
I it was building their faith to say
Mhm,
they left that experience and said, "Even the wind and the waves obey him."
mhm, mhm.
And I don't know, I to me, that's not something that I have noticed every time I read that passage.
Right. Yeah. There's certainly some fear from the disciples, but it wasn't the kind of fear that turned them away from God. I think you used the word marveled, which is much more probably accurate to the emotion. It's the sense that I am small and he is big is terrifying and in the bad way if he's against me, but it's wonderful in a good way when it's so clear because he's just proven it that he's for you. Then his bigness, his power, his authority, he can even make the wind and the waves obey him. Like, that's really good news now because he just showed me that all that power is he's going to use it to protect me. And I may still feel awe or fear around him, but that's the kind of awe or fear I feel around, again, my dad's bigger than your dad.
Yeah. It's like the awe of authority, right? When
Yeah,
somebody has the power to send you to jail, or, like, you're like, "Oh gosh, they could do whatever they want." Like, that's kinda scary.
it's the kind of awe that this may be a terrible analogy, but it's the kind of awe that leaders are trying to engender in their people when they march the army in front of them, right? The whole point of that is to a show of power, and it's supposed to do two things. It's supposed to show their enemies, we've got a bunch of stuff, don't mess with us. And it's supposed to show the people in the parade, we've got a bunch of stuff, you're safe, you know? And that's, yeah, I feel
Mhm.
like one of those builds faith, confidence in God.
How does this story connect with us and the storms we're facing right now, right? What can we pull away? What can we actually, I don't know, what
Right.
bring us back to the our 21st century context?
Well, I mean, honestly, Peter, I think in some ways we've been talking about it because it's a shift of our understanding of who God is,
Mm,
right? So as we and this is why the next episode where we talk practicalities is going to matter because
right.
right now we're just talking about the insight. Then we'll answer the question how. But right, so our storms are inevitable in our life today, whether it's the politics that we're facing or personal stuff or family or death or whatever. The shift in perspective is to ask a different question,
Mm,
which is to say, what is God doing? Who is God? And maybe that's the shift. It's like rather than
mm,
seeing it as God's not doing anything, it's a question of let's pay attention to who he is and what he actually is doing. And I think that's Jesus being asleep during the storm. If we could just change our angle at which we're looking at reality, we would suddenly see that as huge comfort,
mm,
right?
mm,
Because all of a
mm.
sudden now, God, who's got all the power to control the chaos around us, is completely unafraid of what's happening. He's not worried in the
Wow.
slightest that the boat is going to go down because he's asleep. He's taking a nap. And
Mm,
if I could see that, knowing who he is, then I'd be like, not to worry. This storm looks bad, but as long as Jesus is still sleeping, we're fine. The time to get worried is when Jesus starts getting worried because I know who he is, right? And that's the point. Like the disciples didn't have all the information. They didn't fully understand who he
mm.
was. Um,
Wow.
so okay, so let's turn it to what they say after. What do the disciples say after Pentecost when they know who Jesus is? All right. Well, Philippians 4 through 9. One of my friends pointed this out to me. Here's, here's Paul. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Win all the time, even in the worst of circumstances. Let your graciousness be known to everyone. And there's this one sentence. The Lord is near. And we sort of like skip over that sentence so fast and fail to recognize that that's the cause of all of the stuff he's saying in this passage. Why should I rejoice?
Mm,
It doesn't mean well up rejoicing in your hearts. And if you're not rejoicing, you suck. It's pay attention. The Lord is near. Notice Jesus is not worried and therefore rejoice, right? We rejoice because of something. We don't just rejoice. Rejoicing is not the answer to your anxiety. The Lord's presence is the answer to my anxiety, and therefore I can rejoice. Don't worry, he goes on, about anything, but in everything through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Well, why not worry? Because the Lord is near. Means I can present my prayers and petitions to him because he's right here, right? We talk
mm.
about prayer being always a response. Well, the only way I can present all these things to him is because he's right here listening, available. Wake
Yeah.
him up if you need to. That's fine. He's here. And so I think that's like number one biggest thing, shift in perspective is
Yeah.
to the question, is God asleep in the boat, has a double meaning,
Mm,
right? If God doesn't care about us, isn't powerful, if he can't do anything, that's a terrifying prospect. Maybe he's just asleep in the boat, not paying any attention, and he doesn't care whether we die. If God, I know because of Jesus, cares about whether we die, cares about how things are going, is very invested in our well-being, then him being asleep in the boat is fantastic news. He hasn't decided that he needs to come back yet. It's not
mm,
over. We're not, I mean,
mm,
even though I'm a sheep led to slaughter,
mm.
still I can rejoice because God is present and he's got it. Even the wind and the waves obey him.
That's crazy. That sorry, like I just feel like that I'm seeing like what you're saying. Like, and I've encountered this passage many different times, and kind of with some of this lens too. I know we've talked about it before, like in
Yeah.
preparation, but that is absolutely bonkers that like the same circumstances can go from yeah, looking at Jesus asleep and being like, ah, like he doesn't care. We're like we're gonna perish. To this is him giving me comfort because he is saying to me, "You don't need to worry. I'm not worried." I mean,
Yeah.
like, and it's like the those range of outcomes is just mind like the shift of perspective of like, oh, I know God, and if He's
Mhm.
like, this is him not being worried.
Mhm.
Which, by the way, God's never
Never
worried about
worried.
anything, right? Like, right? Like that's that we could sit with that for a while. But like that his inaction in the light of a threat is actually, like, such a resounding message of confidence, courage, and comfort to us that we can
Mhm.
be like, My God's not, anxious,
Mhm.
upset, or pulling his hair out going, what am I
Mhm.
gonna do? What am I gonna do?"
Right.
And, like, we can go, "Okay, I in some way, this is gonna be okay because
Right.
he's got this." And that's just
Right.
crazy. Like, the swing is like,
Yeah.
that's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think it gets better because it's the God's inaction according to our perception. Because here's the next thing I think Jesus is currently doing. Um, Here's what he says, right? Here's again, now this is the Gospel of John. Here's what John says that Jesus told us. John 14:18, and kind of bouncing around in John 14. This is 18 and following, verses 18 and following. I will not leave you as orphans. This is Jesus speaking. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Like, notice that phrase.
Hmm.
The world won't, I'm leaving. I'm air quoting for those of you who are on listening. And the world won't see me, but you will. You will see me, even though I'm quote unquote gone, because I live, you will live too. On that day, you will know that I am in the Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. So I'm leaving, but I'm not leaving. The one who has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me, and the one who loves me will be loved by my Father. I also will love him and will reveal myself to him. I have spoken these things to you while I remain with you, but the counselor, the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit of Jesus, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and remind you of everything I have told you. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give it as the world gives. Don't let your heart be troubled or fearful. You have heard me tell you, I am going away and I am coming to you. If you loved me, you would rejoice that I am going to the Father because the Father is greater than I. Why rejoice that Jesus is going to the Father? Because now when Jesus ascends, his spirit descends to dwell literally in me and I in him. So now we can sort of shift it. Jesus may have been asleep in the boat, but now he's not. Now he's alive and well and active constantly, spiritually within me, present in his body, the church, as a good Lutheran, present in the sacraments, present in the preaching of the gospel. So he's not doing anything. It's not that there's inactivity. It's just inactivity in the way I would want it to be. But he is not only present in that sort of sleeping in the back of the boat way, but he's present in the fullest way. Like, the reason I'm glad that he ascended is because now I have him more than they had him before the death and resurrection, which is the meaning of Pentecost, right? That's the whole point. Like, Pentecost is the culmination because now Jesus' spirit dwells in them.
Yeah.
So, here's the words that we've used so far. We didn't say them, but the first one is faith. Like, faith is that shift in mind, that repentance, that metanoia, that different mind, which is God is for me. Therefore, if he's asleep in the boat, great news, because if God's not worried, I don't need to be. But he also is present and active within me and his church, and I am in him, united with him inseparably with the guarantee of the Holy Spirit, which gives me hope because he will return and all will be made right. And then the third one and the last one that for today, as you could guess, is going to be love. So again, we're all just talking about shift in the way we see or think about God. This isn't telling you how to do it. This is just preaching the good news, if you will. We're just telling you the truths. Jesus is actually doing even more than all of the stuff we just said. Here's what he says. Again, John 16. I have spoken these things to you in figures of speech. A time is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures, but I will tell you plainly about the Father. On that day you will ask in my name, and I am not telling you I will ask the Father on your behalf, for the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and have come into the world. Again, I am leaving the world and going to the Father. His disciples said, Look, now you are speaking plainly and not using any figurative language. Now we know that you know everything and do not need anyone to question you. By this we believe that you came from God. Jesus responded to them, Do you now believe? Indeed, an hour is coming and has come when each of you will be scattered to his own home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone because the Father is with me. Okay, so if you're tracking, you're going, what the heck is going on? Why is he reading this? Well, here's why. All right, Jesus is saying, I'm leaving. I'm going to be speaking plainly to you soon. But right now I'm still speaking in figures. The disciples kind of don't get it. They're like, okay, now we understand, but they don't really. And Jesus is like, look, there's going to come a time when it's going to get really, really ugly. And you're all going to freak out and run away and be faithless. And we all know, that's exactly what happened. They all freaked out. Judas betrays Jesus. He gets captured or taken into trial. All the disciples abandon him. Nobody's sticking around. Peter denies him. Sound a little bit like our day and age right now? Amen, right? Except that this is what Jesus finishes. He says in verse 33, John 16:33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world. Be courageous. I have conquered the world. And remember, what does Jesus say? Every stinking time he shows up, or nearly every time he shows up after the resurrection, the very first thing, peace. Be not afraid. Here's what Jesus has done about all the chaos and craziness of the election year, of our family lives, of everything. He's already conquered the chaos that matters. He's already destroyed sin, death, the devil. There is nothing that can harm us at all, period. All evil works to make us better, to strengthen our faith. This is the This is love. He loves us so we can love others. And I'll wrap it up here, but if you want to read more about this, like to get the picture of how God is actively doing something about the chaos and evil that we're facing right now, there's a little pamphlet that Luther wrote called "On the Freedom of a Christian" or Christian Treatise on Christian Liberty. It goes by both names. You can find it online for free. On the Freedom of a Christian, or or on Christian Liberty by Luther, and very worth the read. It's not super long. At, he gets to a point where he's talking about what the freedom of the gospel has done for us, what Jesus has done for us. And he makes this exact point, that because we are now united with Jesus, we are kings and queens over everything, and everything has to serve us, which means that even sin, death, chaos, suffering, the only thing that it can do, because it's been conquered, is good for us. It's not allowed to do anything else. So even when it feels in the moment like it's hurting us, we have this confidence that it is actually in God's, because of God's conquering of the world, it's actually working good for us. And that's the bizarre backwards message of the gospel, which is actually the forwards message that we just, our backwards brains struggle to see.
Mhm.
But that's actually the truth. Like, God isn't sleeping in the boat. He's already defeated the waves. Like, the image I had, Peter, was sort of like, the storm is like right after this, when Jesus says to the waves our first picture, when Jesus says to the wind and the waves, peace, be still, or he rebukes them and says, be still. They all stop, and the water stops going crazy. And then you can imagine the ripples going out.
Yeah.
And I imagine that we sort of live still on the fringe where those ripples are. But
Mm.
the storm is already over. And he's already done the work. Does that
Mm.
make sense?
Yeah, I'm hearing like the storm, like capital
Mm-hmm.
letters there, like the storm that matters most, are sin and death and separation from God. Jesus completely conquers sin, death, and the devil, enslaves them, makes them captives, and that's like the stopping of the storm. But there's still like we still feel the effects in
Mm-hmm.
little ways. But what you're saying is like, because Jesus is the conquering king, his prisoners of war, death, sin, the
Yep.
devil, that can
Yeah.
only ever serve us, right? Wherever they show up is just in some way, God's redemptive work is in and through that to,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, perhaps I'm even thinking of the image, like the disciples' faith was built because they went through the storm on the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
Similarly, a storm
Yeah.
comes and we can say, this sucks. This is chaotic. I feel horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere it's like, but God uses this to build my faith,
Right.
to help me trust him more and to bring
Right.
people to know him.
Right. Well, and that's the big secret, right? Is that, go back to our episode with David Zoll on the Law and Gospel recently, that, our question kind of throughout this whole thing has been like our perspective shift. And we've been thinking, does God care whether I die or not? Does God care about the storm? And what we think he should be doing is essentially making us better people virtuously, or solving our suffering, or fixing the political crisis, or making our nation safe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever it may be. And God does care about those things, but David Zoll said this beautiful thing, right? God cares about faith first. And so, yes, everything is serving to increase our faith, which is our knowledge, dependence, confidence, trust in Jesus. Go read that little pamphlet I told you about from Luther, and you'll find out that that's not a small thing. That's the most precious, valuable possible thing. It's not like Jesus is concerned about the least important of things. He's concerned about the one thing needful growing in us. And the reason that's the only thing he really cares about the most is because that's the thing we need the most and then we'll do the most. And that's everything else is sort of secondary.
Yeah.
We just carry around this sin nature that sees the secondary things as first.
Yeah. Well, and that's like a great, so hopefully listeners, if you've been able to track with us, then it's sort of like the question of like, all right, I can imagine that reality. I can grasp it like a little bit with faith. But if you're anything like me, like us, like, then it's sort of like, how do I live in that reality? How do I, cast my eyes to Jesus and what he's doing more often? And that's where our follow-up episode on, okay, this is the reality that we live in. The storm has been conquered. But I need help attending to that reality. And we do. I do. I need that help. And if you're anything like us, then join us in this next episode, because we want to unpack some of the actual practical prayers and practices that help us notice God not asleep in the boat, God at work in our lives. And so I'm really excited for that conversation, just because like I so need that myself. And we pray that this conversation has been fruitful for you guys as well.
Yep. I would say this, because listeners are going to have to wait 2 weeks for the next conversation, which I'm sorry, like right now you're all going, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for all those. Thanks for all those fancy words, thinky boy. Now tell me what to do with it. And I'm with you. I mean, hello, reason we started the ministry. That's exactly what this was all about, which was I knew all these things sort of, but I had no way of, to use the cliched language, moving it from my head to my heart. But since you have to wait 2 weeks for that episode, I would want to leave you with this. It's okay to move slowly. Really, the whole next episode is going to boil down to this in some sense. Allow yourself to dwell on the truths that we have been talking about. Just for the next 2 weeks, you don't have to know any particular practices. That's what we're going to talk about. But just allow this stuff to occupy your mind. Don't resist it when it comes back to your memory. And see how you feel. Notice, even right now, notice the feelings you have compared to the feelings you had when we started. Just see if there's a difference. And if there is, then just call those back to mind over the next 2 weeks. And then we'll talk about some more stuff. So cool. Peter, thank you. Listeners, thank you. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send us an email, podcast@signpostin.org. We would love it if you would share these episodes with someone. Please just click the share button on your phone, send an email to a friend. It would be really awesome. That's how our show grows. So thank you so much, and may the grace of Christ go with you wherever the road takes you.
Amen.
Thanks for listening. This podcast is a production of Signpost Inn Ministries, a nonprofit Christian ministry dedicated to strengthening people's relationship with Jesus and walking with them compassionately on their life's journey. We offer spiritual direction, retreats, and lots of other resources like this podcast. Please visit us at signpostin.org to learn more. We especially want to thank our generous donors who support our work and keep this podcast going. If you've benefited from something you've heard, please consider supporting us by making a tax-deductible gift at signpostin.org/donate. We also want to thank Rex Daugherty for creating the original theme music for this podcast. You can check out more of his work at his website, and you can find all the links in our show notes.